A Uvalde, or however it's pronounced, mother was placed in handcuffs by federal marshals on scene for attempting to enter the school to get her child. Another man was tased for trying to get his kid off a bus, all while the demonic shooter was alive inside, killing kids. It appears that we have yet another situation in which the cops were either complete morons or total cowards, or both, standing around outside for 30, 40 minutes while the demon, I won't say his filthy name, was inside, doing his evil work. Parents begging to go in themselves and rescue their children, and the cops not letting them do so. And then a friend reminded me and sent me this. This is not the first time we've seen either rank incompetence or shameless cowardice, or both. That was the case in Columbine as well. Let's take a look at this appalling account of what happened at Columbine with those cops. Reading through Columbine, apparently this is a book, and one of the things that stands out the most to me is how much the cops actively made the situation and the aftermath worse. First, let's talk about how quickly the cops got there. 13 people were killed, and many more injured, so there must not have been any cops nearby, right? Wrong. The first cop arrived on the scene within 5 minutes of the first shot, and before the killers actually went inside. So what happens next? The cop accidentally chases them into the school towards more victims, and then sits outside and waits, despite hearing the violence going on inside. As more cops arrive, they all wait as well. This was protocol at the time, and it was clear that they were terrified. However, they signed up for this. The students inside did not. They had guns. The students inside did not. As the sheriff and other leadership arrive, they surely acted quickly and decisively to save the kids' lives, right? No. They continued to treat it as a safety issue for the cops, later claiming they didn't know what they were up against, how many shooters, etc. What could the cops have prevented if they had actually acted? 11 of the 13 people who were murdered were killed after the first cop was on the scene, and 10 of those 11 were killed in the library. At the time the killers entered the library, there were already 6 cops outside. Before the killers arrive, a teacher in the library calls 911 and is advised to have everyone hunker down. This advice proves to be deadly. Here's where the story somehow gets worse. The cops pretty quickly figure out who's involved, partially from witnesses, but partially because they pull up a website belonging to one of the killers where he has detailed out what he is in the process of doing. Now the cops can't be blamed for that, right? They couldn't be expected to know that, except, yes, they should, because a former friend of the killers had called the police to report them and this website 6 months before the shooting because they wrote about killing him. At the time of the threat, the cops even went as far as filing a report and filling out a search warrant to search one of the killer's homes. But it must have been too much work, because they never actually did anything about it. So while the cops are sitting on their hands and waiting for the SWAT team to arrive, people are dying. I'd like to focus here on the one teacher who died. Dave Sanders is the third person shot, but was able to escape, with assistance, to a classroom. It should first be noted that Dave is in this situation because of his bravery. He had a chance to run away, but was more concerned with getting the attention of as many kids as he could, and getting them to safety. He was shot only after he had already warned many students. Dave is cared for by students and a teacher in the classroom. He was shot at 11:28 a.m. He was still alive and responsive when the killers died by suicide at 12:08 p.m. So why did he die? You're never going to believe this. The cops were too scared to rescue him. So what happened with Dave? The cops are informed by a 911 call from inside the classroom of Dave's condition at 11:45 a.m. When the cops finally make it to him, it's after 2 p.m., and he is still alive. The cops force the kids giving him aid to leave him there. It takes another 40 minutes for a paramedic to get to him. Dave is dead by then. He survived over 3 hours without professional medical intervention. His death was completely preventable. Why did the cops take so long, even after the killers were already dead? Because they insisted on starting at the furthest end of the school and clearing every room, one at a time. It took them hours. They essentially killed Dave to ensure they weren't harmed. Maybe they just didn't know how bad he was. You're going to sense a theme here. They knew. They were told over 911. One of the students received paramedic instructions over the phone. One student held up this sign in the window, seen by the cops and broadcast on live TV. One bleeding to death. So there was all this needless death and destruction. Surely it was better once the massacre was over. Except now we begin phase 2 of Cops Make It Worse. The cover-up. The cops cover up the fact they knew the killers were dangerous. They have a secret meeting to circle the wagons. They destroy the police report that was filed by the friend, both physical and digital versions. The cops cover up and minimize their own response, claiming, among other reasons, that they thought there were booby traps, even on the killers' bodies. No booby traps were ever found, only poorly designed bombs that were supposed to explode before the shooting began. Speaking of bombs, the entire time the cops were hiding outside, they were actually surrounded by 2 car bombs left by the killers that fortunately failed to go off. So even in their cowardice, they had put themselves in more danger, but got lucky. What else did they cover up? How much time do you have? They promised a report on the massacre in 6 to 8 weeks. A draft version of the report would not even be seen for 1 year, and then only because a judge ordered it to be released. The report wasn't even the end of the cover-up. The families had to sue for more information constantly. More than once, the cops said, "Okay, here's the rest. That's all. We promise." Only to demonstrate a perversely comic inability to lie. For example, in one instance, they numbered all the pages of evidence, then removed thousands of pages, and then handed that over with an obvious numerical gap in the middle, and thought no one would notice. In another instance, the families were made aware of a training tape the cops had made, which was really just a video they had taken of the library after the bodies had been removed, and the audio had been replaced with Sarah McLachlan's "I Will Remember You." To add insult to injury, after the families got access to the tape, they were charged $25 each by the cops to cover the cost of making copies. Surely the families at least were compensated for this utter failure and dereliction of duty by the cops, right? No. Between the cops' good friend qualified immunity and that consequently negligence was insufficient to win a lawsuit brought against the cops, the families had no chance. Eventually, the family settled for $15,000 each, except for the Sanders family, who had a stronger case and got more, but not nearly enough. So in sum, the cops caused more harm than they helped, acted like cowards, and refused to accept responsibility, as they continue to do today. Nauseating. Nauseating. As C.S. Lewis wrote, "We pitiful moderns are men without chests." And as T.S. Eliot wrote in The Wasteland, "We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw. Alas, our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless, as wind in dry grass, or rats' feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force gesture, without motion. Those who have crossed with direct eyes to death's other kingdom, remember us, if at all, not as lost, violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men.